Yo, how's it going? Today we've got a new video. Leave that comment to let me know if you're enjoying this manhwa. She mentioned how the elders of the secondary family were saying that Soran had been very insolent. Soran stated that he would test this by confronting the clan elders directly. My jaw dropped. He laughed loudly while saying that the boy was amusing. The next day, everyone was gathered in a hall. The clan elders were skeptical. The warrior handed Soran a wooden box. The warrior informed him that he had mixed licorice powder and honey to make it sweeter and easier to consume. Soran was impressed by how the man paid attention even to the smallest details. Soran asked the warrior if he had done it exactly as described. The warrior replied that he had followed the instructions carefully. Other clan members commented to stop exaggerating, questioning how incredible it could be. The patriarch ordered silence and asked Soran how he would prove the remedy's effectiveness. Soran acted surprised by the question. The clan elders shouted that it was natural to confirm this. One elder exclaimed that they would never dare send unverified poison to the Lord of Sichuan City. Another elder agreed, saying that if something went wrong, it could lead to a great disaster. Soran responded that there was no other choice. The warrior understood. The clan elders were confused because the warrior handed the remedy to them. They became irritated, thinking it seemed like Soran was telling them to test it. A tall elder asked Soran if he knew what that was. Another elder commented that Soran had been playing around for so long that it seemed like his guts had darkened. Soran smiled. He called his grandfather Musan and asked what he needed. Soran brought up what Musan had said before, that those who mastered the Tang clan's martial arts were never afraid of poison. Musan joined the scheme and confirmed this statement. Then Soran pointed out that the elders' reaction implied they were scared. Musan agreed with him again. Soran provoked the great elders of a clan that had certainly mastered immunity to poisons. He used reverse psychology and expressed that surely those elders weren't afraid of something as trivial as beetle poison. This irritated the elder, who split the remedy in two. They claimed they had nothing to fear from such an insignificant low-quality poison. They took the remedy and told Soran that he underestimated them. They threatened Soran, saying that if he didn't act, he would face consequences. The elders shouted that they would be the ones upholding the laws and principles of their clan. They chewed. Silence followed. Then they smiled and shouted that nothing was happening. But the elder felt his masculinity rising. The long slumber of the serpent had ended. They were embarrassed, and that day the laws and principles of the clan were straightened, pun intended. It happened magnificently. The remedy was sent to the Lord of Sichuan City, and its effects proved excellent. Shortly after, the elders crossed the hall, holding their pants apart to hide the evidence. I remember walking like that when the time came. Anyway, Soran told Musan that it was exactly as he had predicted. Provoking the elders with something related to poison made them fall immediately. Musan knew they were the kind of people who had nothing but their pride, so this would naturally happen. But Mang also understood that their actions came from a place of concern for the clan. He told Soran not to resent them too much. Mang stated that in the end, they were all one family. Soran replied that he understood. V hurried in. She reported that something terrible had happened. They asked what it was, and she told them that their children were acting strangely. Soran blushed and was perplexed, while Musan became scary as he called his grandson by affinity and grabbed him by the collar. Musan asked what that meant, why they had children. Soran was drenched in cold sweat. They hadn't yet had their wedding ceremony. But Han shouted that what she meant wasn't human children, but the spotted centipedes, the ones Soran was raising. Soran was stunned. Surprised was an understatement to describe his reaction. Lately, he had been doing many physical training sessions, and every time he asked V to take care of them, he ended up completely forgetting about them. He became worried that something had happened to his babies. He asked to see them, and it seemed like he was about to grab Han's chest as they were stored there. Han screamed that they weren't there. Muan was perplexed. A moment later, the 3 blue-spotted centipedes were all brown and weak. A handprint was on Soran's face. It was funny how he was slapped because of his previous actions. Soran looked intensely at the centipedes while Musan was curious if those centipedes had just fallen from V's body. V with a B replied that they seemed fine before, but now she was worried they might be getting sick. Their color looked a bit pale. The shells seemed strange, but Soram reassured her, saying there was no reason to worry. He explained that this was called molting. Creatures like centipedes with hard shells shed their exoskeletons as they grow, and that was probably what was happening. The mother asked if they were already starting to molt. Soran replied that it would happen soon. One of the centipedes moved in a strange way, and then its head appeared. They were astonished. It was an incredible sight. Then the other two began to shed their exoskeletons as well. They successfully completed the molt, and now all of them were out. V noticed that they seemed almost twice as large as before. She asked if those little centipedes had names. Soran realized they didn't. His thoughtful expression was amusing, and what was even funnier was the names he came up with. Number 1, Number 2, and Number 3. It was so silly that Hanan refused to accept it. She argued that mottled centipedes are said to transform into dragons after living for 1,000 years, so they needed names worthy of dragons. Soran childishly argued that there was no way a mottled centipede could become a dragon, even after 1,000 years. Mua joined the game. A Malhada centipede of 1,000 years is called a dragon. With this answer, Soran realized it must have been Han's grandfather who taught her that. But then Soran thought seriously about the names and decided to call them Nova, Mira, and Grace. The first was Nova, symbolizing the beginning. The second was Mira, meaning fragrance, and the third was Grace, representing something elegant or gentle. Han was delighted. She didn't object because, in her view, naming the children was the father's responsibility anyway. Now the speckled centipedes had their names. A whole day later, the speckled centipedes returned to cling to Soran's body. He still didn't feel completely dry, but it was enough to move. However, he still felt strange. The centipedes were now heavier. Before, they were the size of thick sausages, but now they had grown to the size of his forearm. It seemed that the speckled centipedes thought his embrace was too tight for them, so now they coiled comfortably around his arms and waist. While lying down and hugging the centipedes, Soran heard someone talking. Two men were passing by. One of them had a full bag in hand and commented on how the Tang clan of Sichuan was always so extravagant. He invited his friend to go to the brothel, and the friend thought it was a good idea. They laughed, saying that earning money had never been so easy. Soran felt uneasy about it. At the pavilion, Shan stated he had great news. It was about the medicine they sent to the Lord of Divan's city. He shared how it worked exceptionally well, and how the Lord of the city sent a message of gratitude, including a generous reward. Soran and Hanan were delighted. Shan was also proud and happy to reap so many benefits shortly after accepting Soran as a son-in-law. Soran was glad to be able to help. Because of this, Shan suggested granting Soran one of his elixirs. Shan knew that if he called it a reward, Soran would probably refuse out of modesty. Soran's grandfather had said before that an elixir was something that enhances inner energy. Tara asked what kind of elixir it was. Shan replied that it was nothing extraordinary. It was the honey of the golden bee, the king of golden fur. In Soran's mind, he pieced these words together and deduced it was common honey, but he knew how crucial inner energy was to becoming a martial master. So he decided to accept it for now. Thanking his father-in-law when he interrupted, Elo reminded him that he should reward Soren and questioned why it was only Mel. Shish Olsen became nervous upon seeing the threatening behavior of A. She argued that what Soran had accomplished was no small feat. Even though the golden bee was a mid-level poisonous creature, Mel is the lowest classification among elixirs. She said he shouldn't be stingy in rewarding Soran for such a great achievement, which left S embarrassed. She scolded her father, saying he should grant something equivalent to a year of internal energy. She couldn't understand how he could give an elixir that provides only 2 months of internal energy. Shellen felt sad and justified that it was still an elixir, and that it had been quite expensive to obtain. But this only made her more irritated. She argued that compared to what Soran had done, it was a trifle. Zhao was in a difficult situation. Soran asked what the golden bee was. Shan explained that it's a mid-level poisonous creature occasionally found in forests, its size as big as a small dog. He said consuming its honey grants internal energy equivalent to 2 whole months of secluded meditation. Imagining the bee's size, he became excited and amused, but An restrained his thoughts. She told him she was feeling upset with him. Zhao clarified that this was not his intention. It was just because he thought Soran might like to see the golden bee in person. Upon hearing this, Soran got excited and asked if he was suggesting he see the golden bee himself. That was exactly what Chasan had in mind. Internally, Soran interpreted this as harvesting the honey himself. He had done this a few times during his days as a YouTuber. The knights eagerly followed him toward the door. Soran commented that when it comes to bees, he's basically an expert. Shelson knew Soran would like the idea. Soran asked what the golden bee looked like. Shesh simply replied that it was like bees. Vian could only sigh, and thus the journey to collect the honey began. Shelson provided them with top-quality information, so they thought there would be no competitors. But when they arrived, they found 2 clans fighting. Apparently, those people had also bought the information. One clan asked the other if the guy they bought it from had disheveled hair and a large wart on his face. The other clan replied that it was indeed the guy. But regardless, they wouldn't give up easily. Hearing these descriptions, Soran remembered the 2 men who had passed by him. He realized those 2 were selling information everywhere. One of the men became truly furious with the scammers and shouted, "How dare you insult the Tang clan of Sichuan?" His loud and angry voice, along with the mention that they were from the Tang clan of Sichuan, made those men nervous. Now the peaceful journey to collect honey was far from peaceful. Before Sarang set off on his first journey outside, Chilson warned him to be cautious. As a member of his family and someone from the Tang clan, he should never reveal who he truly was. Saran politely replied, yes, to this. Then Chon looked at something beside him, which made Soren turn his head as well. There were men lined up in front of him. Chilson informed Soren that he would lead those people. It was time for him to learn how to manage others. Soren was baffled. He thought it should be Vun. Joe called him silly and explained that since Vun was his woman and he was her partner, this made him the highest authority in the group. Upon hearing the word partner, Soren became embarrassed. V believed he would do a good job and promised to help him along the way. He replied that he would do his best, but now, amidst all that chaos, he wondered what he should do. He asked the man next to him what they should do in that situation. Soran questioned whether it would be better to share the... Soran was talking with the leader of the Venom unit, Blund Wolfgang. Wolfgang was not pleased with the fact that someone had dared to share the clan's information. Tang Vun agreed, saying that whoever that person was, they had a lot of courage. She was seriously irritated and expressed it with her intimidating aura while questioning the sale of information purchased by the Soanang clan to someone else. Those from other clans recognized her as the poisonous flower of the 3 flowers of Morum. One man couldn't believe that a direct descendant of the Tang clan, the poisonous flower, was there in person. The man was forced to greet her. He represented the Central Wind sect and clarified that they had no intention of interfering in the affairs of the Sichuan clan. He stated they would withdraw. The Noble Origin sect also decided to withdraw even though it saddened them. The Ghost Hunter of Jad also followed suit, withdrawing. One of them swore to catch that damn traitor and skin him alive. They all quickly dispersed. Soran noticed the influence of the Sichuan clan. He asked if the problem was resolved. Wolfgang replied that it wasn't. He knew those unorthodox bastards wouldn't retreat so easily. Wolfgang suggested setting up a camp nearby and taking shifts to keep watch. He knew those men were probably hiding, waiting for the right moment. He instructed Pia to find out where they had set up camp. Soran seemed worried. Vun assured him that everything would be fine. He was more concerned about his golden bees. They hid behind a rock while watching the bees. The bees looked really cute, as if they were wearing fake fur on their bodies. Several of them flew into a log. Soran was excited to see those golden bees. V admitted it was the first time she had seen them too. From a tree trunk, Soran got excited upon seeing those golden bees. V admitted it was the first time she had seen them too. She pointed out how big they were. Soran found them cute. Vaughn was impressed by their fluffy fur. The Afghan was also pleased to see them. Soran noticed how small the colony seemed. It looked like there were only a few hundred of them, but considering their size, it made sense. Vum asked about colonies. Soran explained that it referred to a group of bees, and generally, a small hive would have about 5,000 to 7,000 bees. V was shocked that Soran could say that without even entering the hive. Soran replied that he could estimate by observing how many bees were entering and exiting the entrance. Someone appeared behind them. It was Pai, who reported they had located those unorthodox bastards. The Afghan asked where they were. Pai hesitated to respond at first, but as the Afghan expected, those bastards had set up camp on the opposite side. They didn't seem to be doing much, but if anything happened, they would definitely act. The Wolfgang decided to wait until nightfall to harvest the honey using the Clang method. Soran asked about this method. The Wolfgang explained that if Mugar leaves were burned, the smoke would calm the bees, and during this time they could harvest the honey. Soran responded that it was an excellent method, but Pai was worried because the wind was blowing in their direction at that moment. With that, the plan fell apart. Then Soran thought of something and asked if it was clever. Soran explained that if the wind was blowing toward them, it would mask their scent. So, he decided to take this chance to make a quick visit. He was already on his way when V grabbed his shirt to stop him, saying it was dangerous. The golden bee was a mid-level venomous creature, but Soran wasn't crazy about it. He stated he would just touch it once and return. While he struggled to get away from her, a small pebble fell and rolled toward the hive. They immediately knew it was bad news. In the blink of an eye, the colony swarmed out. V grabbed Soran as she ran. Afterward, they received a monumental scolding. It was twilight, and Soran was still thinking of another way. If they lit the fire against the wind, they would be caught between the unorthodox bastards and the hive. The golden-haired king bee was a bit different from the bees he knew. These bees detected ground vibrations from more than 30 kilometers away. Not even ground bees could do that. V found Soran and shared that the children had finished their meal. They kept trying to escape, so she brought them to him. Soran thanked her. Soran gently told the little ones to behave. One of them sat beside Soran, which left him bewildered. She asked if he had made any progress. He replied that he needed to observe a bit more. She admitted she felt like she was pressuring him and apologized for it. She told him to take as much time as he needed, as long as he didn't feel overwhelmed. But this had the opposite effect on him. Awil noticed something on the other side of the old tree. Monkeys. The monkeys were noisy. V noticed how one of them was extremely irritated. Soran called her name and asked if she smelled something sweet. V noticed the aroma. Soran realized it might be pheromones and quickly told her they needed to leave because the bees were about to swarm. V grabbed him and fled hurriedly. She jumped high and created some distance, still holding Soran by his armpits. The Afghan was stunned. The bees quickly left the hive, and their target was the fallen monkeys. They devoured the corpse. It was a close call for that pair. V was intrigued about how Soran knew the golden-haired king bees were about to attack, since he managed to warn her to leave even before they heard the buzzing. He replied it was because of the smell. Vum finally noticed the faint magnolia scent. Soran was surprised that she could really detect the pheromone scent. She answered that she had smelled that scent before and said it smelled like a magnolia flower. Soran was excited to have found the answer and laughed like a wicked maniac. An blushed because his hands were on her shoulders. With a devilish smile on his face, he declared that he had thought of a way to deal with those unorthodox bastards chasing after their bees. He said, "Come, we have some extras by the campfire." Some extras drank rum, others ate and drank until they dropped. The extras questioned when the clan would collect honey. One of them commented that it was hard to say because 3 days ago, they were everywhere, but now it's all gone. Maybe they'll do something soon, he said, and asked another what he thought. The other responded, "Maybe." Another extra dressed in black asked if it was really possible to make money from beehives. Furious at his ignorance, one of them said, "The candles made from the wax of the golden king bee are treasures used exclusively by the imperial family. The clan will only take the honey and leave. Then the leftover hives will be ours. Excited, another extra commented that if they failed this mission and were eliminated, it would be even better. He started laughing and reminded them about the Tang family group, which has the famous 3 flowers of MM. He quickly added that they should be careful not to accidentally kill the murim flower. Another extra expressed his eagerness to see the murim flower, calling it a beauty. Soon, everyone gathered around the campfire, some even uttering vulgar words. However, when they least expected it, their excitement vanished as they smelled something strange coming from the forest. Realizing the scent was pleasant, they wondered if it was the fragrance of the poisonous flower. For a moment, something awoke, a loud noise. In that scene, with the moon hidden by the night, thousands of bees appeared. Seeing the unfavorable situation, they panicked and started running, shouting, "They're Golden King bees!" But it was no use. The bees flew at high speed, catching the extras and tearing them apart mercilessly. The forest was overtaken by screams of horror and despair. Hidden, the others observed the outcome of the protagonist's plan. Seeing that it was working perfectly, someone commented that it was a brilliant idea, and the bees were heading in a single direction. Curious, she questioned the protagonist, not expecting the bees to become so furious because of the flower scent. Dodging the subject, the protagonist responded that he had ordered the bees to launch a mass attack. Not understanding the meaning of a mass attack, she replied, "You just crushed some flowers and spread the juice." The protagonist explained, "This scent triggers an attack command for the bees. It's the smell of a pheromone, a chemical signal used by animals of the same species to communicate. Social insects like ants and wasps rely heavily on pheromones," he continued. "The pheromone I used is exactly the one bees release when they launch a mass attack. It's called isopentyl acetate." Fascinated, she asked if he was saying that magnolias emit the same scent that bees use to signal an attack. Finding it a bit awkward, the protagonist commented that what he found most fascinating was her ability to recognize that scent. She replied that it was the specialty of the Tandia clan, poisons. She was very sensitive to smells. Soon, his attention turned to the forest. The protagonist remarked, "With the golden bees launching their mass attack, we can enter now." They approached the tree with a strange object wrapped in leaves. Slowly, they entered the hive of the golden bees. The elder remarked on the danger and insisted on going first. Inside, they were amazed. The protagonist commented, "They're enormous." Incredible. They gazed at the massive honeycombs. The elder, holding the wrapped leaves, began creating smoke and joyfully said, "Thankfully, they left. These honeycombs are huge." The protagonist agreed but noticed something and remarked, "Unfortunately, there's no honey here." Disappointed, the elder replied, "That's impossible." On observed that it was empty, as the protagonist had predicted earlier. Curious, the elder commented that this had never happened before and found it very strange. Something else caught the protagonist's attention. He remarked, "There are no eggs in this hive either." The elder asked if this had anything to do with the hive being without honey. The protagonist explained that it seemed the bees had been preparing to migrate from the start. That must be why they consumed all the stored honey and carried it in their stomachs. One reason, he added, could be that they sensed many human presences nearby. She commented that it made sense. While examining one of the honeycombs, the protagonist noted that when bees prepare to migrate, the queen stops laying eggs. He is unable to take care of the larvae, and while meddling with one of the combs, something else catches his attention, showing surprise on his face. Right behind one of the combs, there is a bee with a slightly macabre smile. The protagonist asks his leader how long he can use the art of mobility continuously without rest. The old man, with his hand on his beard, says that if he maintains a constant pace, he can last about half a day. Curious, the old man asks what it's about. But something interrupts them. A supporting character appears at the entrance of the hive, shouting the protagonist's name. The character shouts in despair that the Golden King bees are returning. Indeed, they are really coming back. In panic, the supporting character pleads with them to leave immediately. Desperate, they begin to run. However, the protagonist stays behind. The old man tells him to flee immediately, but seeing that the protagonist isn't moving, the old man comes back, grabs him by the clothes, and drags him by force. Soon, they are running again. While still running, the protagonist carries a bee he caught and hid in his clothing. A little farther from the hive, they stop to catch their breath after running so much. The supporting character comments that they barely made it out in time before the bees returned. However, something soon surprises them. Looking at the protagonist, someone asks what he is carrying. The protagonist, with his innocent face, casually comments, "It's the queen of the golden king bees." He explains that since they couldn't bring honey, he brought the one who makes the honey. The old man shudders. "You brought the queen bee?" The queen bee looks a bit confused. Realizing what the protagonist has done, they all scream in despair. The beautiful little bee yawns, and the protagonist, with his macabre smile, calls the squad leader and says that the bees will notice their queen is missing at any moment and will start chasing them. Soon, in the forest, as expected, thousands of bees begin to appear. The protagonist, as if nothing had happened, says they'd better run. Thus began a life-or-death chase. They flee so much that dawn breaks. The queen bee starts whimpering, which annoys the protagonist a bit. Not knowing what to do, he reassures her, saying, "Just a little longer. I'll soon take you to a safe place where no one will bother you anymore." Days have passed since the deadly chase began. During this time, the group pushed themselves to the limit, sleeping only a little and constantly using the art of mobility. Upon arriving at one point, some warriors from the venomous warrior unit had already stayed behind. Realizing that everyone is sacrificing themselves by using the art of mobility, the protagonist truly understands how important this skill is. As they continue to run, his disciples collapse from exhaustion, though some still manage to keep going. One of them carries the protagonist on his back, and while using the art of mobility, asks the protagonist if they'll really be able to escape. 3 days pass, and another warrior, the leader, collapses, apologizing to the protagonist for no longer being able to keep up. In the end, only the protagonist, his friend, and the queen remain. His friend insists she'll carry him, but the protagonist refuses, saying it would be better for him to keep running to assist the young lady. The young lady slaps his face to wake him up, and motivated but with a tired face, declares that a member of the Tang clan never gives up. More time passes, and they reach the clan's gates. The guards, surprised, notice something coming from the forest. One of them remarks that the young lady has finally returned. There they are, the two of them, one carrying the other, exhausted and sleepless. Seeing their faces, the guard calls the young lady's name and immediately goes to help them. Soon the family members are called in desperation. Her father and grandfather come to meet her. However, upon seeing her in such a precarious state, they begin questioning the protagonist about what's going on. The protagonist asks his father-in-law to calm down and explains that the young lady is just a bit exhausted after using the art of mobility non-stop for 10 days. But unfortunately, there's no time for that. They need to head to the training field immediately. The old man, not understanding, asks why the training field. From his robe, the protagonist pulls out the golden-haired queen bee and quickly explains that other bees will swarm there soon. That's why they need to get to an ancient tree in the training field as quickly as possible. The old man bursts out laughing, finding it unbelievable. The father-in-law, confused, asks how it's possible. He sent the protagonist to fetch honey, and he returned with the queen bee. The old man places his hand on his shoulder and tells him to go quickly. The protagonist leaps over the building, carrying the queen to the training field immediately. He soon notices something and starts shouting. The old man asks what's going on. A massive swarm of bees appears. The protagonist yells, "They're coming for us!" The old man, a bit surprised, exclaims, "That's a lot of bees! Did you bring them all with you?" Soon, they land in front of the ancient tree. The protagonist begins running toward it and starts talking to the queen bee, saying this is the new place he told her about, her new home. The bee begins to fly, and the protagonist comments on how great this new place is. She looks around, then starts flapping her wings rapidly, shaking her body as if she's happy. The protagonist thinks the old man, truly delighted, noticing the presence of the bees, comments that it would be better to get out of the line as soon as possible. The bees are coming. The protagonist agrees. The disciples of the clan soon notice the number of bees flying above their heads. Then, the queen bee begins to make her buzzing sound. Soon, thousands of bees enter the tree. The old man, surprised, comments that in all his years, he has never seen anything like it. The protagonist's mission is soon completed, capturing the queen bee. The bees then start living there. The protagonist mentions that they gave sugar water to the bees that pursued them. After all, they say bonds are created through food, and goodwill begins with a meal. Luckily, there's something like refined sugar in this world. It worked this time. This small feast should help reduce the bees' hostility. It would be even better if they recognized the protagonist as their master. As a master, however, in an instant, the protagonist realizes he forgot something. Curious, several people ask what it is about. The protagonist comments that it was the young lady he forgot. The old man asks if he only remembered just now, and explains that he sent her to the protagonist's mother-in-law to rest a little because she really had used her mobility skill for 10 days in the forest. The protagonist agrees, but feels somewhat guilty, commenting that they barely managed to sleep 4 hours a day. The rest of the time was spent just running. They are surprised, and the old man quickly realizes and asks where the members of the venomous blood unit are. The protagonist, who forgot again, comments that they must be passed out somewhere along the road. And that it's better to send someone to fetch them. Later, the members of the poisoned blood unit return safely to their families. The protagonist visits the cheerful young lady. She comments that they said the bees regained their strength and asks the protagonist if that isn't great. The protagonist agrees and says they are collecting nectar from the poisonous flowers of Mount Clant. The young lady comments that this is very cute. However, Algos interrupts by shouting the protagonist's name. Curious, the protagonist asks what's going on. One of the disciples soon says the protagonist needs to go outside quickly and explains that something is wrong with the bees. It seems like they're looking for something. The protagonist finds it curious and goes out to check. Soon, surprised by the bees, he sees them flying all around the clan. After spotting the protagonist, they begin flying toward him and soon start clinging to him. He gets a bit nervous. The young lady asks if everything is okay, but soon the bees that were clinging to him begin to lift him and make him fly. Not knowing what's happening, he starts asking what they're doing and why they're acting that way, but it's too late. He is already very high up, and the bees begin carrying him somewhere. Meanwhile, on the ground, the young lady and a background character are left clueless about what's happening. Soon, the bees leave him in front of an ancient tree, their new hive. Still confused, the protagonist wonders why they're causing such a commotion and asks if something is wrong. However, one of the little bees starts pushing him toward the tree. Realizing he is being pushed, the protagonist notices it wants him to go inside. He is surprised to see that the bees have already built part of the hive and are working hard to gather honey. Soon, he notices something flying toward him. The queen bee approaches him. She lands on his hand, and soon other little bees also land all over his body. Covered by the bees, the protagonist realizes he can't move anymore as the bees cling to him. But something unexpected happens. The queen bee gets closer and closer to his face until she kisses him, catching the protagonist completely off guard. However, this kiss comes with something strange. The protagonist starts feeling something odd, and after they part from the kiss, he almost falls backward from so much embarrassment and surprise. Embarrassed, the protagonist comments to the queen bee that it was his first kiss and asks what she did. Still feeling strange, the protagonist collapses to the ground, breathless and completely drained. On the ground, without any strength, he asks the queen bee what she just gave him. The large bees watched the protagonist writhing on the ground while a reddish aura on his body expanded more and more, bringing the sensation of heat. Behind this strange discomfort, it seemed like there was an itch in his body. The sensation that took over his body was an intense heat that made him foam at the mouth and nose while grinding his teeth and sweating relentlessly. His heartbeat was very accelerated. Still, with great difficulty, feeling a strong heat in his body, the same sensation as if he were on fire, he slowly stretched out his arm to try to reach the queen bee. With little strength left, his last words before passing out were a question about what she had made him eat, and then he passed out. Still with his eyes closed, the protagonist heard his name being called. The beauty was asking her grandfather what was happening to him while showing her concern for the protagonist. The old man, stroking his beard and with his vast experience in unusual situations, commented that apparently he must have swallowed a very potent elixir. After hearing this, he passed out again. The old man began to guide his kui to help him. Shortly after, the beauty took care of the protagonist with a warm towel. She wiped his face. Sitting on the bed with messy hair, he asked where he was. She replied that he was in the medical wing of the clan. Fixing her hair, she explained that when they saw him, he was being dragged by the golden-haired king bees. She and her grandfather immediately ran to the hive. When they arrived, he was already unconscious, so they brought him to the medical wing. She questioned him, asking if he remembered anything that had happened. The protagonist sighed, putting his hand on his face, a bit upset. He thought about his first kiss in that world. The curious beauty noticed that something was wrong due to his expression and asked if he was okay or if there was something wrong with his body. She also asked if he wanted her to call her grandfather. The protagonist looked at his hands, sighed, and said no. Then he commented that the queen bee fed him the same food she ate. He thought that's what caused that situation. The curious beauty asked what he ate. The protagonist commented that he didn't know the exact name, but if he had to name it, he would call it the king bee's elixir. Surprised, she repeated, "King bee's elixir?" The protagonist, with a small smile on his face, said yes, and explained that the worker bees collect nectar and pollen to feed themselves. Only the workers, who dedicate their lives to work, consume this nectar and pollen. After this explanation, she asked if that was the case. Then, what does the queen bee eat? The protagonist replied that from birth to death, the queen bee feeds exclusively on the king bee's elixir made by the workers. In other words, the jelly that the queen bee forced him to eat was royal jelly. Understanding the situation a bit, she commented, "Ah, I see. So it's the queen bee's exclusive food throughout her life." The protagonist, raising his finger, said, "The king bee's elixir has a special effect." Surprised, she asked, "An effect?" The protagonist immediately explained, "Normal worker bees live a short life of about a month and a half, but the queen bee, eating the king bee's elixir, can live up to 60 times longer." Then he asked, "Don't you think that's incredible?" However, after consuming so much information and still surprised, she told him to control himself, that it was too much information. But with a sigh, she said she understood. "The mystery is solved," she said. She explained, "The internal cultivation method you practiced is the 5 venoms return technique. It's just a beginner's technique, so you wouldn't be able to absorb all the elixir's power. But considering that the golden-haired king bee's honey contains 2 months of internal energy, you basically absorbed 60 times that amount, which would be equivalent to 10 years of internal energy." Then she congratulated him on his lucky encounter. The protagonist began to emit a little of her energy while she repeats 10 years of internal energy. She, a little apprehensive and holding her hair, comments. Besides, she asks him to take a look at the silver mirror afterward. While blushing, she averts her gaze from him, saying that there may be other effects of the queen bee's elixir. Curious, he questions what other effects, scratching his face and showing doubt. Not knowing what it is, he asks what the silver mirror is. He picks up the mirror, and upon looking at his reflection, he notices something strange. His skin is so good it even shines. Still looking at himself, he wonders if royal jelly has always had these kinds of effects. He asks where the country girl from Wine is. Touching his face, he is surprised to realize that not only has his cultivation improved, but also his skin is soft and smooth, almost like a woman's skin. While touching his face, he realizes that perhaps royal jelly, the food produced by the queen bee, may have caused some effects not very pleasant for him, making him imagine that perhaps he has just turned into a girl. He looks around curiously to clear his doubt. Then he looks between his pants, and with a sigh of relief he lies down on the ground, happy for not having lost his most precious possession. Lying on the ground, he remembers that Ain had said that if her grandfather had not guided his chi, something disastrous could have happened. He thinks that at the very least he should thank her grandfather, since he was on the brink of death and was saved. The protagonist leaves the medical wing. He walks through the clan where everyone looks at him. Noticing these stares, he wonders why so many people are giving him strange looks today. He even questions if this might be because his internal energy increased. The stares and whispers bother him so much that he decides to flee and runs off, leaving the extras laughing at him as he runs. He arrives at the clan's restaurant and takes a small peek through the door. He soon spots his father-in-law, his future wife, his mother-in-law, and the old man dining. The protagonist's mother-in-law quickly notices his presence and, pleased, comments on how handsome her son-in-law is. She asks how he is feeling. The protagonist approaches them, greets them, responds that he is fine, and apologizes for worrying them. However, his mother-in-law, already aware of the situation, says it is okay since he had such a fortunate encounter that it becomes a reason to celebrate. Soon, she decides to cause a little embarrassment to her daughter, saying she must be envious of the protagonist's skin. She becomes embarrassed but quickly recovers and invites him to sit. Embarrassed, the protagonist agrees. He sits at the table before a huge banquet where everyone enjoys themselves. His father-in-law asks if he is feeling well after all that happened. The protagonist responds that he is and apologizes again for worrying them. He also says he would like to thank the grandfather after learning that he took great care of him. The old man, smiling, says he heard that the protagonist had a lucky encounter, so he congratulates him. Seeing the curiosity in everyone's expressions, his father-in-law cannot contain himself and asks if he could explain to them what happened. He says he heard a little about the queen bee's elixir from wine, but wants to know exactly what happened. The protagonist does not know how to respond. He scratches his face, unable to find words, but soon responds by saying that it seems the golden-haired queen bee liked her new home a lot and decided to reward him for his kindness. Moving his finger as he explains, he says that she dragged him into the hive and fed him. With the elixir of the king bee, he concludes by saying that he thinks all the confusion started because of it. To his surprise, his mother-in-law comments that even mid-level venomous creatures know how to show gratitude, and she finds this very fascinating. The old man, equally surprised, asks, "By the way, if there's any way to get the king bee's elixir again." He mentions that if they could, it would greatly benefit Tang. The sect leader observes that just the honey from the golden-haired bees would already be an incredible treasure, but that the queen bee's elixir would undoubtedly be an extraordinary blessing. Soon, the protagonist's mother-in-law, excited, agrees and asks her son-in-law if he could get more of the king bee's elixir, leaving everyone at the table confused by her spontaneous reaction. His fiancée then asks the protagonist if he could obtain more of this elixir. The protagonist thinks and reflects. If they were just regular bees, they could simply create several queen cells, the chambers for queen bees, and trick the worker bees into producing royal jelly for them. However, if they tried this trick with the intelligent golden-haired bees, they would be turned into hives in an instant. Besides, royal jelly is basically baby food produced by worker bees. But what the protagonist consumed came directly from the queen herself. He ponders whether what he ate might not even be the same substance, which makes him reflect even more on the situation. He wonders if he should be honest at that moment. Finally, he decides to say sincerely that he thinks it wouldn't be possible to get more of the elixir. This makes the old man and his mother-in-law question why it wouldn't be possible. The protagonist explains that even if someone could consume it, he doesn't know if anyone really would. Curious, the leader asks what he means by this, questioning if perhaps the taste is bad or if it has a strange smell. With seriousness, The protagonist replies that it's neither about the taste nor the smell. Sweating cold, he reveals that the king bee's elixir comes directly from the queen's mouth and that it seems the only way to receive it is through direct contact with the queen herself. He explains that the method involves forming a connection by joining lips with the queen, with her tongue entering the recipient's mouth to transfer the elixir. Everyone is shocked. The old man shouting asks, "A kiss on the queen bee's mouth?" His mother-in-law is left open-mouthed at the explanation. The old man, even more shocked and sweating cold, concludes that they must assume it's impossible to get the elixir unless it's the protagonist, since he was favored by the queen bee. For anyone else it would be impossible. Soon his fiancée, understanding what happened, drops her chopsticks, outraged. She asks, "A kiss on the mouth?" with a completely terrifying expression and a murderous look. She says the protagonist's name, insinuating that he kissed the queen bee. With that, I leave today's video. A beautiful night hovers over time. We see someone clenching their fists so tightly that their veins throb. This person is the leader of the Murim Alliance, the Emperor of the Fist, Ju Junghak. In his chambers, a servant, calling him the leader of the alliance, announces he has brought tea. He allows him to enter. A beautiful woman with a gorgeous dress, a lovely face, and beautiful hair, carries his tea on a tray. She says she has prepared the white dew of Mount Zishan. The leader of the alliance is surprised, and he soon communicates that this is the tea from his homeland. The beautiful lady says yes. This is the famous tea of Mount Zishan from Nanchang. Content: the leader says he will enjoy it. She serves his tea, and with great delicacy and just about to drink it, someone else calls the leader's attention, saying it is General Jegal Hu. After his tea is interrupted, the leader of the alliance tells him to enter. The young man introduces himself, greeting him, and apologizes for interrupting his rest, the leader of the alliance. Then he says he actually received a message from the Tang clan of Sichuan, and he thought it necessary to inform him immediately. The leader says he understands. Since he came with such urgency, it must be something important, and he tells him to speak at once. The young man adjusts his robe, and from it he pulls out a scroll. After placing it on the table, he says that it is about the Rakshasa of the Bloody Hand, Tak Unyang. The Tang clan recovered both his head and the secret manual of the venomous art of the Bloody Hand. The leader of the Murim Alliance, furious at this news, even shattering his teacup, questions him. What? The art of the Bloody Hand? Where and how did they manage to recover this terrifying manual? The young man, seeing the reaction of the Emperor of the Fist, grows somewhat cautious. The young man, seeing the reaction of the Emperor of the Fist, becomes a little cautious, still clenching his fists and gritting his teeth. The leader affirms that years ago, Tak Unyang disappeared after being struck by the blow of the divine sovereign of the 10,000 poisons. Later, it seems he must have ended up on Hainan Island and lived isolated there. The young man who brought the report claims to have an even more interesting story and says that the famous demon, Takunyang, was defeated by a young master of poisons. The leader appeared surprised in his expression, and quickly curious, he asked what he meant, who the young master of poisons might be. The general, finding the story very interesting, even sits down and says that the story behind it is quite intriguing. Fanning himself, he says he believes that even the leader of the alliance might find it interesting. He soon asks for permission to explain in detail. However, the young lady who had served tea earlier seems not very pleased with the idea. We return to the hall of the patriarch of the Tang clan of Sichuan, and there, all the highest-ranking members were present, as well as the protagonist. In the hall, they were discussing something. One of them, outraged, said that there are people bold enough to sell the information they had obtained to other places. Everyone there found it audacious. They were surprised that there could be people willing to tarnish the clan's reputation just to sell some information. The protagonist, with a strange expression, softly whispered to his fiancée, saying that, surprisingly, they weren't speaking ill of his father-in-law. She replied that, of course, they wouldn't. The protagonist's father-in-law began speaking, silencing everyone in the room, who turned their attention to him. He said, How could someone dare tarnish the family's honor? Even the elders of the collateral branches are furious about this. After all, we are all one family. We've already asked the beggar's sect to find out who they are, so we should have news soon. He mentioned that he intended to personally visit the commandery of Yingchuan. One of the elders questioned him, asking how he intended to handle this situation. The father-in-law sighed, but soon said, "I will begin with the soul annihilation poison, the bloody flames poison, and the intestinal paralysis poison." And with a murderous and terrifying aura that made everything tremble around the table, the father-in-law declared that once they are writhing in agony, with their blood boiling, organs dissolving, and feeling as if their souls are being torn apart, I will finish with the 7-step soul-cutting poison. The protagonist was shocked by the mix of poisons his father-in-law planned to use on the traitor. The leader affirmed to his servant to summon the poison annihilation unit immediately. He would depart right away. The servant acknowledged and followed the orders. Just outside the meeting hall, everyone from the Annihilation Unit awaits your command. They remain on standby, and the father-in-law turns and says to the protagonist, "Son-in-law, I'm leaving. Take care of things while I'm gone." He greets the protagonist, who understands and asks his father-in-law to take care of himself on his journey. The father-in-law, smiling mockingly, asks what he should be careful of, for it is they who should be worried. The father-in-law gives his command to the Annihilation Unit, who all march out shouting that they will ensure their punishment will be unforgettable, with a great revenge. The protagonist and his fiancée watch. The protagonist asks his fiancée if those men are part of the Venom Annihilation Unit, after saying he has never seen them before. She, a little surprised by the question, replies, saying they are assigned to deal with somewhat heavy tasks, and explains that their main responsibility is to eliminate people, that they are called the Venom Annihilation Unit. The protagonist is surprised by their work. Soon, 2 elders enter the scene. His fiancée and the protagonist greet the esteemed elders of the Tang sect. The elder in front, with a slight smirk, says he has heard they recently had a lucky encounter. The protagonist, surprised by the question, still answers yes to the elders, and thinks they must be talking about the royal jelly of the golden-haired queen bees. The elder who was behind steps forward, drawing attention, and says the reason for summoning them there is to ask for a small favor. Surprised, the protagonist questions what kind of favor it would be, and asks if it has anything to do with the golden-haired queen bee, but the chubbier elder says no, that's not it, and asks the protagonist if he really thinks they would stoop so low as to covet something like that. The protagonist says that indeed miraculous elixirs and rare treasures find their owners naturally. Curious, the protagonist asks what it would be then. The elders feel somewhat hesitant to say. However, the chubby one gathers courage and approaches the protagonist's ear and whispers softly, "The medicine of the earth beetle," and reminds him that it was he who made it, and says that he has authority over it. The protagonist quickly understands their situation, and seeing it as an opportunity, the protagonist tells them with a little grin that he has found it difficult to adapt to life in the clan, but if they, the esteemed elders, are willing to help him in various ways, there is no reason for him not to share with them. The elders, seeing that he is willing to share, become overjoyed and say that now, yes, this is how one should speak. He has a good head, and they call him son-in-law and say that from now on he will have their full support, so he doesn't need to worry and can live comfortably. However, soon the former leader of the sect appears. Surprised by their closeness, he asks what cheerful conversation they are having. The chubby one says it's just a friendly approach to the son-in-law. The protagonist agrees. With his relaxed laughter, the great elder says that they finally seem to be appreciating the true value of the protagonist. They begin to flatter the protagonist. However, one of the sect's disciples shouts to the great patriarch, saying there is a major problem. Surprised, the patriarch questions what it might be. The disciple informs him that the lord of the province of Sichuan is on the verge of death. The information takes everyone by surprise, leaving them shocked by the situation. The protagonist, also surprised, questions whether the dosage was not followed correctly. The disciple, quite reluctant, says that apparently, after experiencing the effects of the medicine, the Lord took new concubines and began consuming more than double the recommended amount. The protagonist cannot believe what he has done. The patriarch, sighing and disappointed, says he must leave immediately. He adds that since the protagonist is the only man left in the house, he should protect the women. He asks if the protagonist understood. Saluting him, the protagonist says yes. The patriarch immediately departs. Confident, the protagonist wonders what could go wrong. Night falls, and he sits on a bench alongside his fiancée. She asks the protagonist how his learning of the dual origin art of the 10 poisons is progressing. Sighing, the protagonist says it is not as difficult to understand as it was at the beginning. He thinks that if the technique of the return of the 5 poisons feels like a single large sphere moving inside the body, then the dual origin art of the 10 poisons is more like a 2-cylinder engine. His fiancée says that by now, he has probably already developed some resistance to common poisons. She adds that, besides that, he should be able to release his chi directly or even infuse objects with it. Surprised, the protagonist asks if that's true. Confident, he says he will try. He stands and distances himself from an object. He focuses on his energy. He begins to channel the internal energy from left to right, spinning the 2 spheres in the same direction. When the chi circulates completely through his body, he releases it, launching his blade, which he had been channeling energy into, against the object. The blade, gaining high speed after hitting the object, creates a large hole in it. Surprised by the result and excited, he asks his fiancée if she saw that. She says it was incredible that he managed to perfectly infuse the dagger with his chi. Some masked individuals who were hiding around the area in search of an opening are surprised by the dagger embedded in the wall after it nearly hit him, making even them question whether they had been noticed there and if they should eliminate them. One of them says that this doesn't seem like a coincidence. One of the masked individuals holding a book says that although it's just a copy, they managed to obtain the secret manual of the bloody hand poisonous art, so their work there is done, and says it would be better to leave quickly and return to the main sect before problems arise. One of them, calling the Tang sect fools, says they didn't think the sect would be so careless with the security of the training hall, and thanks to their negligence, escaping would be easy. However, they sense a sweet aroma in the air, making them question what that smell might be. But this sweet and delicate aroma in the air, so alluring, is actually the scent of the golden-haired queen bees, which were flying closer to them. In that darkness, if there was a desperate scream, immediately the protagonist and his fiancée wonder what that was. His fiancée quickly comments that there is someone there. Immediately, they reveal themselves by screaming. The golden-haired bees revealed themselves to them. They were attacking them, who, fortunately, were caught off guard. Because of the bees, they couldn't protect themselves and also ended up exposing their location to them. Realizing they are intruders immediately, his fiancée acts, rushing against them while shouting for the protagonist to shoot arrows. Some of the intruders who managed to free themselves from the bees were shouting for them to retreat immediately. Soon, each one fled in a different direction, leaving their friend behind, still dealing with a bee. The lady shouted for them to stop immediately. Since shouting alone wasn't enough, she acted, drawing her thorny whip and using it against them with a simple flick of the whip. She landed a strong blow, but the intruders, including the one immobilized by the bee, managed to dodge the powerful strike of her whip. The lady is shocked that they managed to dodge. The intruder with a bee stuck to him drew his blade and ran toward the lady for a counterattack, shouting, "Die!" Seeing danger approaching the lady, showing concern, the protagonist shouted for her to be careful. The intruder who struck at the lady was easily blocked by her thorny whip. After demonstrating her skill with the whip, the lady landed a blow on the intruder's face, and like a dance, she delivered other strikes to him, eventually knocking him out. The protagonist, still concerned, asked if she was okay. The lady calmly said she was fine. The protagonist approached the intruder, but he was shocked by what he saw. A mysterious phenomenon occurred with the intruder. His body began to dissolve, making the protagonist question what was happening and if, By chance, he was dead. The lady, who already knew what she was seeing, explained, "He bit a poison capsule and killed himself. He probably had something to hide." Around them, they hear screams, probably from the disciples, who had already noticed the presence of the intruders. The young lady commented that it would be better to organize a pursuit team immediately and start the search. She immediately called the protagonist to accompany her to the leader of the Venom Blood Unit, Gu Pei, the night, which was already long, continued to drag on. In the forest, the pursuit was underway. A large group searched for the intruders, including the protagonist. The disciple leading the protagonist's group commented that the intruders couldn't have gone far. They needed to capture them at any cost. The protagonist, trying to keep up, was already struggling and pleaded with his centipede pet to help him. While running, the protagonist had a bit of bad luck, stepping wrong and falling into a hole, causing a small commotion as he fell. The disciples immediately turned back to help him. They helped him climb up, but what he didn't expect. When looking down, he came face to face with a nest of hundreds of snakes, leaving him in shock. The disciple commented that it was a snake's nest. They usually gather where the yin qi is strong. Particularly during this season, they become abnormally aggressive, so it would be better for him to stay alert. Just observing, the protagonist noticed this. He explained that striped water snakes don't usually behave so aggressively. These snakes are also known as flower snakes or square keel snakes. Returning to the main topic, the protagonist commented that they were delayed because of him, and it also seemed like it was going to rain. They needed to hurry. They agreed and immediately resumed running, until they finally came across the trail of the intruders. Until they finally managed to corner them, the rain fell heavily. Immense lightning with thunderous sounds making the atmosphere even more tense, showing that at any moment, a fierce battle would break out. Even with the Tang sect showing its superiority, the intruders would not make it easy, even willing to give their lives for their interests. The disciples shouted that their escape ended there. The siege tightened more and more, each with their blade in hand, ready, until the moment when, with no other options, the Tang sect attacked the intruders, and with the first blows struck by the Tang sect, the intruders defended themselves while repulsing them and calling them rats. The intruders showed that mere numbers would not intimidate them. They also managed to strike back, not just defend, hitting some of the Tang sect disciples. The chubby disciple, also skillful, struck at the intruder, but the intruder dodged and stepped back to reposition himself. However, the disciple, seeing an opportunity with the intruder's defense open, threw a dagger at the intruder, who, even with his defense down, used his blades to break the disciple's attack. But what the intruder did not expect was that the dagger would multiply into shards and end up hitting his shoulder. The disciple immediately exclaimed that the intruder was lucky to have been hit by only one of the shattered daggers. The disciple also explained that he was lucky because the poison on the dagger had been diluted due to the heavy rain. Only the most skilled intruder among the three was left standing. However, he was already writhing in pain because, though weak, the poison was still acting. But amidst the strong thunder, a sinister laugh caught their attention. A mysterious voice called the disciples of the Tang clan pathetic, and said it was pleased to see so many insects gathered together. The disciple of the clan was shocked by what he saw. Immediately, an old man with a strong oppressive aura landed in front of them, breaking the ground where he landed, revealing his terrifying face and bloodthirsty intent to everyone present. The disciple, overwhelmed by the aura he felt, immediately shouted for everyone to retreat, as it was a martial master. The martial master, with his malevolent laughter and hair moving like tentacles, laughed wickedly. Then he questioned the intruder who had survived if he had obtained what had been requested of him. The intruder pulled a notebook from his cloak while slightly bowing to the martial master. The intruder explained that it was not the original, but a registered copy from the Tang clan. The protagonist, seeing the notebook, remembered what the old patriarch had said. That is a book that only evil people look at. Shocked that it was the sinister book the patriarch had spoken of, the protagonist told the disciple Gu Pei that this was a copy of the secret manual of the blood-stained hand's poison art. Gu Pei was stunned to learn it was the secret manual. Furious, he questioned the martial master, asking how, as a human being, he dared to covet something so sinister. He demanded the martial master's identity. Ignoring Gu Pei, the martial master was only concerned about his book. With the book in his hands and a wide grin, he remarked that even though it was a copy, it contained the technique's forms, though it lacked the critical formula. Still, it was sufficient. Clutching the book tightly, the martial master commented that, though it was a bit premature, there was no better way to announce their return. The old man declared, "Blood glory!" and granted permission to unleash the cult's martial arts. He also ordered that no one be left alive there. The intruder, bowing, said he would do as the martial master wished. The intruder, who had previously been coerced by Gu Pei, raised his hand above the dead intruder on the ground and used a mysterious technique on him. The blood of the intruder seemed to be drained. Shocked, the protagonist asked what technique that was. Gu Pei explained that the intruder was absorbing his blood. After completely draining the intruder's blood through the palm of his hand, the intruder's aura became even more apparent, visibly stronger. The martial master, with his malevolent laughter, remarked that he had been right. Then he introduced himself as none other than the elder of the blood cult, the hawk's dagger claw of the blood falcon, Lord Gu Cheonak. With his bizarre expression, he showed how much he was enjoying their despair. Looking at the protagonist, the old man commented that he was in excellent condition. Perfect, in fact, licking his lips and revealing his sharp teeth along with a series of other bizarre expressions. He clapped his hands. He then remarked that it had been a long time since he had tasted the blood of a pure youth. The rain falls and they are faced with their enemy, the old man comments to his henchman, "Capture the young boy. After all, there is nothing better to recover than the pure blood of a young boy." The henchman seriously confirms his master's order and runs towards the protagonist's group. The leader of the group quickly shouts, "For them, release the annihilation formation of the 5 poisons." From above, the old man fires a heavy attack with his leg. On top of the leader of the protagonist's group, a fierce fight takes place while the protagonist tries to protect himself. Unfortunately, the old man's henchman has already managed to do total damage. However, still protecting himself, he realizes that something was happening. Then he looks back, he finds one of the old man's henchmen appearing behind him. This henchman puts the protagonist in a chokehold. While he was putting him in the chokehold, he asked him to stay still, since his goal was always to get his blood, which at the time was the purest of all. So being impressed by his arm, he ends up almost losing consciousness. While he was almost losing consciousness, he just called people, and the people he was referring to were our little caterpillar, who appears from his clothes and starts attacking this old man's henchman. He then looks at it and notices these things biting him. After biting a little, he realizes that what was biting him was a centipede. That was very dangerous. He couldn't let a monster like that bite him, but out of nowhere something appears that, well, let's say, pierces the thing from above him. He then, after being crossed by this, is thrown with brutal force, backwards, and the protagonist is alert and afraid of all this, while the little caterpillar, on the other hand, just celebrates this because they really liked it. Knowing who it could be, he turns around and realizes that perhaps this could be one of Miss Yong's attacks, so he quickly turns around, which ends up facing her group. She and the elder end up coming towards him. However, as soon as she ends up arriving at the place where the protagonist was, she has a surprise, because she ends up realizing that whoever was in front of her was some elders from the Blood Sect clan, while the guys who were fighting the elder realized that it was the formation of the annihilation of the 5 poisons, and as soon as it appears, they end up wondering what was happening. One of the henchmen then, turning in the fight, turns to her, And the moment he turned around, he comments that an elder from the blood cult attacked, out of nowhere, his sect. The moment he says the blood cult, we see her face of surprise. She doesn't believe it. The elder from the blood cult. That was bad. Then she orders the people to help the vice leader Ganbai fight against that old man and his comrades. So, obeying the order, they advance. Advancing, he asks them to get into formation, the formation of the annihilation of poison. After everyone is formed, we see them surrounding the old man now. The old man finds himself in a place where there is no way out, but he still celebrates. Now he realizes that this is the boy who knocked the poison art claw off Tang Yang's sacred hand. With a smiling face, he is happy and comments that it seems that the claw of the bloody hand was just an overrated name at the end of the story. And to think that he was bitten to death by just one centipede. However, one of the protagonist's friends asks him to shut up. Otherwise, his end will be the same as that guy. Until then, saying that thing was fine. But he smiles in a more mysterious way and wonders if that was really it, since if they really wanted to defeat him, they would need to have a lot of strength, so he could be trying to gain power. And the elder at that moment releases a dark aura. While all that event was happening, we see outside in the middle of the forest, explosions happening. Meanwhile, these explosions are happening in the middle of the rain. We find the protagonist taking care of one of the injured guards. While he was taking care of him, he asked him to hold on just a little longer. The situation was not good at all. On our side, she is getting more and more exhausted, since no one in her group has enough strength to fight that old man once and for all. Since that damned blood cult guy only sucks the blood of his opponents to recover, and with that, he could be fighting more and more against his opponents. While he was thinking about what he could do to win against that old man, something happens behind him. That was our wife, who was thrown with all her strength by that old man against a tree. The protagonist only hears the noise, and then quickly turns around and finds Miss Royin fallen there. She then ends up coughing. In this situation, the protagonist gets up and approaches Miss Royin and asks if she is okay. She says she was. Then she grabs the protagonist's hand and asks Yang to return as quickly as possible to the clan and bring more warriors from the Tang family. Just them, there wouldn't be enough to be able to defeat that elder. The protagonist, of course, has no choice, and it's true. There's nothing else he can do in this fight. That elder has the upper hand. Once again, we see the guards asking Yang to return as quickly as possible to the village and call for the Tang family. With the Tang family, they could certainly be defeating that elder. The other one tells him to go and call for help, because they would be using all their strength to hold this guy back. After all this pressure, the protagonist stops and just listens to the sound of the rain. Only then does he say, "Okay, I'll go back, but you'll also come back as quickly as possible." However, that was perhaps an order, something that his mind might not want to be true. He wants to stay here to protect his wife, but she appears while he was still commenting that his immobility skills are still very weak. Will he still be able to do it? But she appears and then hugs the protagonist. After this hug, I'm already announcing a wedding for you here. But hey, she ends up commenting that everything was fine. Only later does she comment that he'll be able to do it, since he's been training really hard these days, and there's no way he won't be able to get there. And next time, he doesn't need to worry either, because both of them will get out of this story alive, and so they can be looking for more poison. So again, she asks Yang to go to the village, and she was counting on him. So she gets up, turns against him, and goes towards that elder. While he just watches her running, now that he's left her behind, he just comments to himself that all of this was driving him a little crazy. As the rain fell, we found him in the middle of the forest, now running. He was running, but at the time, because he was running so much, he felt exhausted. He ended up not realizing that there was a rock on the way. This rock makes him trip over it. And in the end, he ends up falling face down on the ground. Falling to the ground, we found those centipedes of ours coming out of the protagonist, and they stick to him, wanting to give him support. He realizes that all this was strange. Even using the immobility arts at maximum speed, it would take him almost half a day. Most of the clan's experts were too far away now. Even if he called for reinforcements, they didn't arrive in time. While poking the centipede, he gets on his knees and starts looking at the rain a little higher and tries to think of what he could do. After thinking, he remembers that there was one thing, that they only told him to leave just to save him. But why? He even thinks that maybe he is the youngest, because he was also the weakest and also needed to be protected. And in the end, all of this meant honor of the most real artists. So maybe this is the meaning. And from now on, he is part of their family. This reminded him of quite bad things, since in his past life, he never had the opportunity to hear the word family. But in the end, he still believes that he was not really part of the Tang family. But now that he has stopped to think about everything that has happened and gone through, well, if this is not part of the family, I don't know what our protagonist thinks about life anymore. Since everyone considered the kid as someone part of their family. Of course, everyone did except himself. With a smile, he thinks that, for a clan of assassins, all of this was not very affectionate. He starts to poke his centipedes, while they are happy about it. Now, getting up, he says that now he needs to get up, to at least be able to save the mothers from these centipedes. They then understand the meaning of this, and become happy. We see the protagonist running in the middle of this rain. While running, he continues saying that he wants to save people, and that he needs to think that the blood cult, the blood, is regeneration. But there are poisonous creatures nearby, poisonous spheres, poisonous herbs, all of that. Everything he needs has to be nearby. And so he stops quickly, and as soon as he stops, he ends up realizing that right in front of him, he is, again, that snake den. As he advances a little, he realizes that there is a hole. He finds those snakes there again, those snakes from before. But as soon as he finds those snakes, we see one of the protagonist's centipedes. Irritated, it wanted to go after them, but our protagonist asks them to wait a little because in the end, everything was fine. So he takes down all the centipedes that he had stored there with him. There on the ground, they with their cute faces. He asks them not to do that, but in the end, he understands that this was a sign of good things, and the protagonist then starts to run. He runs while they stay behind, calling for the kid, and after that we only find the kid then in front there, jumping in the middle of the pit of those snakes, and then the snakes, seeing the kid, end up simply opening their mouths. But the kid was smiling, and then he said that, yes, he was a snake tamer, because as a space fighter, he has to solve all the dangerous situations, and let's say poisonous ones, all by himself. The red-necked water snake, also known as the 100-flower snake, is a very venomous snake, technically speaking. At this point, the protagonist finds himself in the middle of several snakes. They are coiling around him. Unlike vipers, which have curved fangs in front of their mouths, these snakes have small venomous fangs that are in a very difficult place to inject venom into the protagonist. Even so, a bite from one of these snakes was no joke. In terms of toxicity, this snake that coils around his neck is the most venomous land snake in East Asia. And to tell you the truth, to give you an idea, their venom is even more venomous than that of the black mamba. But these techniques of the Tang clan's internal energy allow him to somewhat resist the venom of these monsters, so everything was fine for him. While all this is happening behind the scenes, they appear worried about the protagonist, but he has already said that everything is fine, and he just asked them to wait for him a little while, because he is going to leave. While he is thinking about leaving, he starts to look at the palm of his hand. Looking at the palm of his hand, he realizes that this should be more than enough. And since it is more than enough, he even thinks about whether he should be leaving and is going there. But he asks them to wait, because he notices something there that he had not seen before. And for him, this happened unexpectedly, and at this point, he could be surrounded by these snakes, and their venom would tame the protagonist. But from above there, the three jump on the protagonist's shoulder. Now then, close by, we see that the protagonist realizes that they wanted to protect him. On the other side, Famitu, were the snakes with their mouths open. However, on the other side, there were the protagonist's allies, anxious, protecting the protagonist from anything. And, with that said, the first larva then jumps towards one of the snakes that was biting the protagonist's arm, which ends up biting that snake, throwing it away. Now on the ground, the protagonist wonders what Grace was doing. She could take down 1 or 2, 3 snakes at once, but for her, Grace, that wasn't even a problem. She managed to take down that thing with just her bite. Now near Cask, he ends up realizing that she was most likely worried about the protagonist. In the end, he just thanks her for being concerned and for helping him. Now, the snakes that were below didn't want to mess with the MC and the girls anymore. So, now that everything is over, he asks his larvae if they should be leaving here now to see their mother. In the meantime, he was getting ready to get out of that hole. From another location in a rainy scene, we find her, who at the moment was panting, since here, she was facing the elder who, even using everything she had, she couldn't hold that elder. He was too strong. If this continues the way it is, everyone here will be dying. And, in the hands of that elder, we meet again one of those leaders from before who ended up being caught by him. He was being sucked by that blood technique of his sect. While he was being sucked all the blood, we see him just laughing. And everything that happened so far for him was too easy. He wants difficult problems so he can test his new skills. And then he shouts if by chance there was no one else around here who could receive his blows. But already worried, she hopes that Mr. Yong, at least, managed to escape safely. Then she starts running towards the elder, asking him to keep him under control. Because this rain that is falling here will soon be over. So this could be sending another signal to ask for help, until a leader appears asking Hworin to run away from here like our protagonist did. However, she refuses, because she is a direct descendant of the Tang clan. She can't just abandon her companions in the middle of a fight and is letting them die here. However, he ends up refuting, saying that if, by chance, he lets her die, how would he be able to face the leader of his family again? So he just asks her to run as fast as possible. But she ends up telling them to stop talking nonsense, because someone who was born in the Tang family couldn't be abandoning their principles. Talking so much, he starts to get irritated and asks so that everyone would shut up, because he also won't allow anyone here to escape. If his toys managed to escape, how would he have any fun? And, with a smile, he comments that he had a good idea. If he can't calm his anger that is here now, at this moment, he will take all his anger out on the Tang clan, which will cause the Tang clan to despair and decline, which will make him fun. And not only that, but the return of the blood sect will also be announced. That, for him, would be more than appropriate, to show what a triumphant return was. The leader realizes that they didn't even think about letting anyone here escape alive, and that was the idea. And for that, she ends up taking out her whip. Even if everyone dies here, she will be ensuring that she will at least take one of this elder's arms. As soon as she comments on this, they all go into combat mode. And then they all start to stare at each other. The old man smiled, while the two of them thought about what they should do. But, as Miss Hworin said, the Tang clan will never retreat, and will never abandon its principles, its comrades in combat. Everyone then, surprised, begins to look back, where they heard that mysterious voice. The protagonist's wife is left open-mouthed and in disbelief, because her Yong, the protagonist, appeared there out of nowhere. In her mind, she wondered why he came back. As it was written on his face, the protagonist answers everyone that she just said something, that the Tang clan would never abandon its comrades. And by also being part of this clan, he will be doing a favor by destroying this blood clan. And to do so, he takes off the sweatshirt he was using to protect himself from the rain. A little more serious, he takes his daggers, and only then does he start running towards the elder. The elder looks at him and stops, but she asks him to stop. He smiles happily. He even comments that he basically didn't need to be running around the city to look for this boy, and since he came to cause his own death, he'll make a triumphant death for himself then. Calling him an idiot, we see the protagonist jumping over him with his daggers in hand. The protagonist's wife screams his name. Meanwhile, we only see that those 2 daggers of the protagonist were bounced back. They fell to the ground, and the protagonist was grabbed by this old man, with no way out now. He comments that he will be offering his lifeblood to make his own strength grow a little more. And with that, he can finally rest here now. He then ended up moving his hand towards the protagonist. His goal was to touch the protagonist's body. However, he didn't manage to do it very well, because he ended up using his arm to block his technique, but that was already idiotic. And also, he ended up forgetting that his arm runs blood, and blood for him was his triumph. That's what he wanted. He starts sucking the blood that was on the protagonist's arm. Sucking the blood, he starts screaming. She screamed for the protagonist, while his companions asked his people to go there and save her young. And everyone starts running towards the elder to, at least, be able to take her young from the hands of this elder. The elder comments that his blood was sweet, and that it will be very useful for him now. With a macabre smile, he says that it has been a long time since he was able to taste blood as good as this. He didn't want anyone to ruin this moment. And to do so, he kicks the ground, managing to split it in half. This skill that he used was a technique of his blood clan, and everyone who was there was thrown back. At the same time, the protagonist, however, now it no longer made sense for him to keep his young, and all those weapons that were thrown in his direction and were caught by him and his companions who were killed, everything was now rewarded with the blood of this boy. But she called for her young, but the elder asked her to stay calm, because he would make her die without even feeling any pain. The moment he said pain, he began to feel that pain. In himself, his mouth starts to foam and he wonders what he just did. What he sucked was not the protagonist's blood, but rather poison. A very powerful poison, which was together with his internal energy. This was impossible, because the ability of his clan should make this poison ineffective. The elder wanted power, but in the end, he got something that was infallible. The thing that defeats everyone, baldness. Going bald? He screamed, cursing the protagonist with several names. However, the protagonist fallen in our waifu's lap ends up getting up and ends up wondering what he just said, since he points in his direction, and only then does he say that, from the beginning here, he was his natural enemy. Not even a chance. He had no chance of defeating our hero. Our hero, continuing from where we left off, in the glow of dawn, we see the bald one, who was already worrying about his beauty. Meanwhile, the protagonist lay on the ground, wondering, natural enemy? The doubt lingered in the air. On the other side, we could see the protagonist's wife looking at him, yet he was ignored. He didn't like that. He grew irritated, questioning what was happening to him. Ever since he let that boy's blood enter his body, he had felt something changing within him. It seemed that his own blood was no longer obeying his will, but in the end, the domination of the world by the blood cult was still within his reach. He couldn't afford to fall. He wouldn't fall here. He started running toward them. His goal was also to eliminate them. She, who was holding the protagonist, raised her whip to defend herself. Then, after lifting the whip, she launched it toward the bald one. That thing flew through the air and then wrapped around his neck. He couldn't do anything else. She then noticed something strange. The last time she had fought him, she hadn't been able to land a single hit on this bald one. But now, she had managed to strike him. They all wondered why this martial artist hadn't even tried to dodge her attack. Now irritated, he muttered that these brats had interrupted everything, making him incredibly angry. Now he wanted to gnaw their bones, but even that wouldn't be enough to calm his fury, for they had also managed to destroy his martial arts. Now that his martial arts were ruined, he demanded that they die at once. With the whip wrapped around him, he grabbed it tightly. After all, there was no way he could lose. The blood cult had finally returned to the world. They should all kneel before him. But she ordered him to shut up and die already. With a single move, the bald one didn't last long. His head was severed from his body, flying to one side. We then see the previous chief, who notices something that fell beside him. It was the head of that elder. The moment he realized it, he was overjoyed, for this was a victory for them. In the end, the young lady had decapitated the elder of the blood cult. Everyone started cheering and rushed toward the protagonist, but she turned to Yang and asked, "What the hell happened?" That elder was taken down so easily. Out of nowhere, the protagonist called her name. She was startled, turned toward him, and realized that the boy was not well. No, he was in bad shape. He asked to be taken to a certain kind of snake, saying he needed to be bitten by them to restore his blood. Upon hearing this, she was shocked. Water-striped snakes? Those snakes weren't venomous at all. But while she was speaking, he lost consciousness. She quickly called for an antidote, assuming he had been poisoned by the water snake. Not understanding the situation, she called for the warriors, who stepped in to help. However, after passing out, the protagonist woke up in a completely unfamiliar place. Turning to one side, he noticed the presence of the elder and his wife, who told Yang not to move. He lay on his back, wondering what was going on. She sighed in relief, saying it was good that he had regained consciousness. Meanwhile, the elder stated that it had been several days since he collapsed. 10 days, to be precise. At the mention of 10 days, the protagonist was shocked. But thanks to the warriors who had been there, they had managed to bring him here as quickly as possible. And thanks to him, they had been able to take down that elder of the blood cult. However, if the elder hadn't returned a bit earlier, the disaster would have been much worse, for the protagonist had been exposed to an enormous amount of venom. Now lying down, he realized that this was the second time he had been bitten and had nearly died from snake venom. But now that everything was over, the elder asked him he was fine now, and since he had regained consciousness, there was no more danger. But now, the most important thing, he turns to the protagonist and asks if the striped water snake really has venom, but also, in the end, how did he manage to defeat the elder of the blood cult? Surrounded by these questions, he asks for some time. First, the striped water snake is venomous and actually has 2 types of venom, one inside its mouth and the other from the glands behind its neck. Both of them are surprised because they believed this snake wasn't venomous. However, he comments that these snakes were very timid, and in fact, this venom was only discovered in 1980, when people realized that the tiger snake was highly venomous. Then the elder changes the subject and asks if the dispersion of internal energy of the blood cult's elder has something to do with this. The blood cult is well known for being immune to poisons or any strong toxins. He isn't sure, but he believes it is probably due to the water snake's venom. And then comes the explanation. The tiger snake's venom has a primarily hemotoxic and hemorrhagic component, which can destroy various structures within the body, including cell walls, red blood cells, and even the inner lining of blood vessels, among other tissue cells. Now, what would happen if a hemorrhagic toxin were introduced into the blood cult, who, in the end, are practically vampires that depend on human blood for their martial arts? The idea worked perfectly. It probably disrupted the blood, which for them served as the source of their martial arts, leading to this outcome. In the end, the fact that the striped snake was venomous was not widely known among them, but its venom was astonishing. And if its venom were amplified by Kai, it could become something truly powerful. She praises him, saying that in the end, Yang managed to achieve such a grand feat. Now, stopping to think about it, he turns to his daughter and asks Aren to say something to him. At first, she says that he ended up calling the elder of the blood cult his natural enemy. This thought echoed in his mind like a cliché phrase, something that protagonists from other works would say to each other. In the end, he tried to give a very obvious explanation, but ultimately, he calls for Yang. In the end, he thanks the protagonist for saving his family. Still close to death, he wonders how he dared to attack his family while he was away. This time, he swears that he will root out this evil once and for all. And yet, he thanks him, because now they needed to act more naturally and put an end to the evil at its core. Now that they know its weakness, all that remains is to collect large quantities of water snake venom. These damned mosquitoes won't escape this time. They will be flayed to the very end. Meanwhile, as this threat looms, we see that ever since the blood cult appeared, The clan had been in a state of emergency. Many warriors of Tang were injured, and some even died. Because of this, the orthodox factions allied with them. The Morim are gathering at the Kantan to offer their assistance. But in the end, considering that they faced someone who was at the peak of martial arts, the losses they suffered were basically minimal. However, thinking about the fact that this bloodthirsty clan has returned to this world, concern should increase significantly. These damn mosquitoes are not only kidnapping people at random to drain their blood, but 30 years ago they also committed mass massacres, making them sworn enemies of the Morim. For the Morim, this is a serious matter. But this time, something will be a little different, because our Tang clan has someone inside who has these damn mosquitoes as a sworn enemy. Only after all this does the protagonist ask if the elder was doing this on purpose. With a smiling face, he begins to ask a question about whether he could make a request to him. The elder then tells him to proceed. Soon, the people of the Morim Alliance will be arriving here. The allied military forces of the Morim will certainly be among those who arrive, and he plans to show them the poison he has just discovered, as they have finally found the weakness of that blood cult. His goal was to share the information. The protagonist understands that this was the right thing to do. He is then happy to know that the protagonist was on his side. But then he calls Parong and comments that he has some news for him that will make him very happy. This news was about the modifications to the Hall of 10,000 Poisons, which would soon be completed. From now on, he is officially in charge of managing the Hall of 10,000 Poisons. At this moment, upon hearing the announcement, he cannot believe it. He even wonders if it was true because, in his mind, he could live in paradise, surrounded by poisonous monsters that, to him, looked like the cutest pets in the world. As he had suggested, they ended up preparing an isolated pavilion for him. After all, to raise extremely dangerous monsters, he needed to be quite isolated. Among all of this, there were some very potent venomous snakes. In the end, our young man thanks him once again, but for the elder, this is a way of feeling secure, because what he is doing is the best for the Morim. At this moment, he thanks his grandfather one last time. Only after this does the scene cut to another location. He found everything incredible. The place was well built. He then points to something written above, a sign that read, "Garden of Toxic Creatures." He explains that it means that this is a courtyard where all the palace's venomous creatures will be kept. She finally understands, but he will also be gathering with highly venomous creatures. He confirms this. In the end, one day, he will also gather 10 great venomous creatures in the central palace. This is something he promises to Arin, saying he will do it for her. She then turns completely red and tells him that she is rooting for the protagonist. She then leaves, as she had an important meeting. Not understanding what Arin meant, we see her leaving, until suddenly, out of nowhere, a man appears. This was the vice leader, who arrived with a certain group of people who would serve as support for the protagonist. This will be his battalion now. Under the orders of the patriarch, all these people will now follow the protagonist from this point forward. They swear by their feet and hands that they will follow Seo Yong until the end. Since raising dangerous monsters required help, the protagonist, upon hearing this, starts to salivate. It seems he now even has employees for his pet shop. They are truly supporting the young man, and at this moment, his dream takes a small step closer to becoming a reality. A pigeon flying through the air eventually arrives at a certain location. When it lands, an unknown girl picks it up. In it, she finds some answers and realizes that the blood cult clan has finally returned. It means that in the plains, calm and peaceful, it will be turning into a completely destructive place where truly dangerous monsters will appear with the goal of draining all the people who were there. But it won't be as simple as that, because on our side, we have our protagonist, who is one of those bald guys. Not for making everyone bald. This is the goal he has in mind. If this is really happening, we will find out in the future. In the next one, of course. Thank you for watching until now. The video is already ending. Maybe I'll see you around now.